With so many different factions and lords in the game, it can be hard for new players to know where to start. Who you pick for your first faction can drastically dictate your chances of coming back for more, so it's important you pick someone that makes it easy to learn the basics of the game without getting too much into the weeds of individual faction mechanics. So today, let's count down the top 10 Immortal Empires campaigns for new players, right after I tell you about channel partner Holy. If you want energy to fuel your day, Holy is a great choice with their line of BS-free drinks powders. They have a whole range of flavors, all of which are sugar and taurine free and use only the finest natural flavors and colors. If you want to give them a try, then head on over to the link below and grab yourself a starter pack, and while you're there, use code Colonel5 for £5 off your first order, or code Colonel10 for 10% off any order. Thanks to Holy for partnering with the channel. Now, onto the list. Let's get the elephant-shaped campaign out of the way first. If you are totally new to Total War, then the Lost God Prologue campaign is absolutely the best place to start. It's a short tutorial campaign to help you get to grips with the basics on a small map before you head out into the full map. This video is assuming you've either done that or decided to head straight into Immortal Empires, since it's the most popular campaign by far. Also, instead of going for the usual method of building up to number 1 of the best faction to start with, I'm instead going to start with the first faction you can play and then slowly scale up in complexity, ending with a few factions that showcase a few different fun playstyles in the game with varying levels of difficulty. So, first up, Tyrion from the High Elves. He is the best start campaign by far because it's extremely easy, albeit a little bit boring. High Elves are a strong faction with simple mechanics, and while they're not all that exciting, they'll help you get to grips with the game so you can move on to something a little bit more complicated. His wars are almost entirely contained to Ulthuan, with the odd exception like Malekith or Noctilus coming to raid you a little bit later on. He's easy to use in diplomacy and can unite most of the other High Elves without too much trouble. Confederation changes might make this a little more challenging, but you can at least make some friends to get to grips with diplomacy. He's an easy lord to use in battle since you just send him into fight and he'll do decently from turn 1. The High Elf roster, even without DLC, is pretty great with long range and great line holders, making for a low maintenance battle strategy. Now sure, without any DLC they might lack some of their most overpowered units, but they'll be fine to get you through your first campaign, especially if you turn the difficulty down to easy, which is totally fine if you're brand new to the game and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Hell, it's totally fine to do at any point playing the game. It's a single player game, play how you want. The location, combined with the faction effects, combined with the faction itself, combined with Tyrion being so easy to use, make a lot of them my personal recommendation for people's first campaign. I've been recommending him since Warhammer 2, and while he's not as easy as he was back then, he's still one of the easiest lords to learn the game with. Next up we have Zhao Ming from Grand Cathay. If you only have the base game and no DLC, I don't think you can do better than Zhao Ming. The game recommends Miao Ying, but I believe Zhao is a lot easier since he doesn't have to deal with the faff of the Great Bastion and can instead focus on taking control of South Cathay whilst his sister slows down the demons. He can focus on his little patch of territory and have a grand old time. Cathay do have a few more mechanics than the High Elves, so you have a bit more to play with and get used to managing, but nothing here is all that complicated. Caravans are roaming money armies that you can dispatch every few turns that eventually become useless because AI just kills them. The compass is picking from 4 sets of bonuses, and the harmony stuff is dead easy to manage now it's all local. Zhao himself is another great lord since he's a strong human fighter, but now has magic to use, giving you a little bit more complexity once you're ready. Plus, he can turn into a dragon. Who doesn't love that? The Cathay roster is also pretty good without needing to have too much skill in battle. They have a few more exciting and complex units like the Sentinels and Balloons, but on the whole can be used fairly defensively to keep things simple. His location is a little bit more challenging than the High Elves since he can technically face threats on all sides, but it's not the worst in the game and it does get you used to being prepared for attacks from any direction, which is par for the course with Warhammer 3 AI. If you just have the base game, then Zhao Ming is probably my top pick. Not quite as vanilla and easy as Tyrion, but still pretty basic to get you started. Next, we have Balthazar Gelt from the Empire. Once you're ready for a little bit of sauce, Balth is a great place to take some next steps. I went for Balth over Karl since his mechanics are extremely simple to use and you can really play him how you want instead of being forced to look after the Empire. In a nutshell, Balth's mechanics are all about spellcasters and making them as overpowered as possible. The Empire roster is one of the most balanced in the game with strong units in every class, with the exception of flying. Sure, their front lines might need some work, but for the most part you'll be just fine and get to try out every unit type to find out what you enjoy the most. Balth is a pure spellcasting lord, so will require a bit more nuance to use correctly, but learning to use spellcasters is part of the game, so sooner or later it'll have to be done, and Balth's a great place to start. That said, with his mechanic, you can get a ridiculous amount of spellcasters and make them incredibly overpowered, so not only will you learn how to use spellcasters, you'll learn to love them with just how stupid they can be. I'm for sure putting this on the list as a fun faction since their mechanics are just so silly you can't help but enjoy playing them. It's another slightly riskier location, but as I said, you just need to get used to that if you want to play Warhammer 3. Plus for Balth, you just need Warhammer 2 and 3, so the barrier for entry is pretty dang low. Next, a bit of a strange one, Demons of Chaos, another from base Warhammer 3, and I know what you're thinking. I know that Daniel sucks and that everything he has, that other Chaos factions also have, but hear me out. He gets to try out all the units and mechanics from other Chaos factions so you can try out each of the monogods and find one you like to try out later. I'm not suggesting you play Daniel because he's so well designed and so fun to play, I'm suggesting that you play him so that you can test the waters with each of the Chaos Gods and find one to play from there. Hell, you don't even have to play much of him, just enough to unlock the basic mechanics from each faction so you get a good taste of how they play and can proceed from there. The roster is also all of the demons from all branches of Chaos, so you can play around with a massive variety of units to see which ones you like. And if we really get down to it, Daniel himself is fun to play for the first time. Building your own custom demon with different parts over the course of the game is good fun and a truly unique experience you can't get anywhere else, for some reason. Aside from this, the faction has no other mechanics, so it's really there just to dip your toes into chaos. It's not the easiest campaign, and it's the first on the list where you're playing as an evil faction, so learning how that works and is a different experience from a good faction is good experience that you can take into future games. Like I said, Daniel is fun to play exactly once, so if you do it early, you're more likely to have fun than if you were to try him later. Next, we have Wurzag from the Greenskins. Staying with an evil faction, and I was torn between him and Grimgor, but I believe Wurzag is the more interesting lord, both in terms of his location, as well as how he works in battle, being a little bit more challenging. The Greenskins are a really fun faction to play as, and once they get on a roll, are one of the most snowballing factions in the game. We're adding more complexity and mechanics, but again, nothing here that requires so much actual faff, and more so just happens as you're playing and adds to the experience instead of taking away. You'll be able to confederate other Greenskins if you beat their lords in battle, which lets you move fast early on, and teaches you a little bit about target prioritization. You'll be able to use Wars to give yourself extra power when needed to take on larger threats. The scrapping mechanic is one of those you get out as much as you put into it, so you can upgrade units whenever you feel like it, without being something that you absolutely must stay on top of. The roster of the Greenskins is a lot of fun, but different to most options I've mentioned so far. Instead of defensive ranged focused armies, the Greenskins are all about constant attack with high damage front lines, monsters, cav, and chariots. They are a little bit harder to use, but still easy enough that a new player should be able to succeed with a little bit of practice. Wurzag can be a little bit challenging to use as he can be quite vulnerable, but his spellbook makes him devastatingly effective in the right scenarios, so learning his limits will be very useful for other future campaigns. Pretty much any of the Greenskins would work for this spot, but I feel Wurzag is probably the most beginner friendly, so he takes it. As a complete contrast, we also have Thorgrim Grudgebearer from the Dwarfs. They've been reworked recently, and while they're still finding their feet with actual numbers and balance of their new systems, they're in a pretty good spot for people looking to experiment with new factions. They're not the easiest in their campaign with all the Ages of Reckoning faff, but this does come with the added benefit that they inspire you to keep doing something, which is an important bit of muscle memory to learn for these games. Plus, the real reason that I'm picking the Dwarves is because of their battle playstyle, which epitomizes one of the easiest ways to play in the entire game. Their front lines are rock solid, and their ranged units are top tier, so you can pretty much set up their army and give minimal orders while still coming out on top. They do have their own brand of magic, but it's totally unique to them and works completely different to any other caster in the game, so while that experience won't translate, the faction on the whole will give you a taste of what a true turtle gameplay is like to play as. I went with Thorgrim as he's probably the most basic and simple dwarf to play as, whilst also being surrounded by a few allies to keep things balanced. Don't get me wrong, you'll still be fighting in basically every direction, but at least you'll come across the occasional friend along the way. The Dwarves' other mechanics also tend to give you a lot of organic direction, so you'll always have something to be working towards. I know that when I first started playing, I just follow missions, but aside from that, be totally lost, so end up in a bunch of wars I didn't really need, just so I had something to do. With these guys, you'll always have some sort of objective, whether that's retaking ancient territory or farming oath gold for crafting. All in all, a quite deep faction with lots to sink your teeth into, will keep battle simple, so are a great choice for a campaign-focused player. As a complete contrast from the Dwarves, the Beastmen are the easiest way to experience Horde-based gameplay as far as how much DLC you need. A Horde campaign is for sure not for everyone, but it is one of the most unique playstyles, so it's worth trying at some point to see how you like it. To keep things brief, instead of taking settlements, the Beastmen instead raise everything in sight to build power in their herdstones to progress their ruination and unlock higher tier upgrades for their faction. This lack of settlements makes them simultaneously lower and higher pressure, since you don't have to worry about defending too much, but if you lose all your armies, you're in much more trouble than you would be normally. That said, they get all their units for free, so it's no real hassle to recruit a new one. There are a few other Horde factions, but the Beastmen are a single DLC, and with that you get 90% of the experience aside from Torix and his units. Khazrak is the most basic of the Beast Lords, but honestly you could try any of the three from the base DLC and have a good time. The Beastmen roster is all about maximum rush with high speed and mass being used to plow through everything in sight as a complete contrast to the Dwarves' more grounded approach. It's a bit more involved when fighting, but it's still fairly straightforward since you basically just order everything to move up and attack whatever they'll perform best against. The Beastmen might not be for everyone, but they're a fun stomp and a great way to dip your toes into Horde-based gameplay to see if it's something you'll enjoy. Next up, Isabella von Karstein from the Vampire Counts. I had to get my Vampire Counts on here somewhere. Now I'm not going to say that they're the best faction in the game or even close, but what they are is totally unique both in their playstyle and their vibe. I mean, just look at these guys and tell me they're not insanely cool. The Vampire Counts are also the faction outside of Chaos that has the most powerful lords. These guys, more often than not, are excellent battlers and come with one of the best laws of magic in the entire game. They carry their armies, which makes them a lot of fun to use, but also means the armies tend to fall apart if their lord gets taken out. Aside from this, the gameplay for the vampire counts revolves around raising the dead, both in terms of their ancient bloodlines lords and units from battle sites spread throughout the map. This mechanic lets you summon full armies in an instant and is honestly pretty overpowered for such a low tier faction. It does help balance out the fact that defeat normally means total army death due to the undead having that pesky thing known as falling to pieces when leadership is low. In battle, the rest of the roster is primarily focused on rush. They have extremely limited ranged options, so rely on closing the gap as quickly as possible and tearing enemies apart from all directions at once. Their roster is also quite low in stats to account for the fact they never run away and are normally relying on a lot of regeneration to keep them working at peak performance. This playstyle is a lot more challenging both in campaign and battle, so it's another good tester faction when you try and see what works best for you and what you enjoy. I went with Isabella because you get her and Vlad right out the gate, so your army literally has 2 lords, which is insanely overpowered. Plus, she starts in a nice central location, so you can fight against a whole range of other factions to test them out. And you know, she's also mommy, but that's not going to be in the test, so don't worry about it too much. The vampire counts may be here because I love them, but chances are, if they made me fall in love with the game, then they can do it again to someone else, so I'm keeping them here. You can't stop me. Next up, we have Orion from the Wood Elves, another incredibly unique campaign that I'm really suggesting because it's a personal favourite. When the Wood Elves got their rework, I feel like they became one of the most fun factions in the game. They do inhabit settlements, but the only ones that matter are magical forests scattered throughout the map. They can teleport between these to cleanse them, unlocking all kinds of powerful effects along the way. They just spice up the normal constant conquest in favour of having focused goals that take them all around the map, fighting all kinds of factions in a single campaign. The knowledge won't really translate to any other campaign, but once you're getting more comfortable, this is for sure one to try out since it's just so much fun. The Wood Elf roster is quite a unique mix since they're primarily focused on their skirmishing ranged units, with a few monsters and decent, if squishy, front lines thrown into the mix. I went with Orion because his wild hunt mechanic lets him get around the map shockingly fast, so ended up being the most non-stop campaign. He also fits into that skirmishing gameplay pretty well, so it's a great introduction to the Wood Elves. I don't have a lot more to say about this one. I just find it to be a whole lot of fun, and it's one of those campaigns that I struggle to do work when I'm playing because I'm actually just having fun. And when you have a few thousand hours across the game series that has become your job, that can become a bit of a challenge. And at number 10, I think the council will take away my gaming license if I didn't recommend at least one Skaven campaign in this video, and if you're going to play as a rat, you may as well play as the rat, the giant rat that makes all the rules. Fair warning, this campaign is the hardest by far to get to grips with. The Skaven have a ridiculous amount of base mechanics like food, corruption, underways, undercities, settlement colonization method, ambush stance. I could go on, but you get the idea. They have a lot to manage, and once you're feeling confident with basic campaigns, they will be a real step up and test how well you can manage everything. But if you can stay on top of it all, Ikit Claw is some of the most fun you can have in Total War. His unique mechanic, the Thor Biden Workshop, allows him to upgrade his weapons teams and war machines to some truly ridiculous levels. We're talking rats with Gatling guns and unlimited ammo, doom wheels with crazy armor and speed, and all kinds of other ridiculous creations are possible when playing as the Pale Rat himself. This is a total power fantasy campaign where you make your units as crazy as possible and have a blast as you nuke the world and rain chaos wherever you go. The Skaven roster is massive with all the DLC, but even without it, you have a pretty solid start with just the base units and Ikit. Plenty of meat for the enemy cannons and plenty of cannons for the enemy meat. What more do you need in life? Like I said, this is the most complex campaign in this video and is really only recommended when you get to looking for a challenge. Plus, to get this guy, you realistically need Warhammer 3 and 2 and his DLC. But wait for a sale and scoop him up and you won't be disappointed. And that's my list. Were there any campaigns you played first that you think should have made the list? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Warhammer 3 top 10s, then why not check out this video on the best ranged infantry in the game. Spoilers, the Skaven are probably on there.